glad to see you all here today. I'll be starting this session for the governance topics in decentralized science. And the topic of my talk would be governance in Web3 way, building distributed governance systems with right stakeholders. So my name is Konstantin. I'm affiliated with Schwarzman Scholarship Program, where I was studying for the last 1 year in China, and my research essentially comes from this 1 year of focusing on decentralized governance. So to start it all with, a very old quote, but Vitalik framed it as, if crypto succeeds, it's not because it empowers better people, it's because it empowers better institutions. And I think the whole concept of decentralized science is there, first of all, to empower institutions. And to empower institutions means many different things, but for us all here, building something that is having a reliable ecosystem without a significant dependency on any individual structure or system is what we are all trying to build. And I think having such a vision or passion is really making you think about any stability in the system requires governance. Whenever you start with building a success for an institution, you need to figure out how governance of that system works. And governance is relevant for any single system that you can think of, whether it's a finance system, whether it's an institution for collaboration, whether it's political system, it all requires governance in one frame or another. Therefore, having a system where you ensure that your governance model is equipped with the right tooling and right structures that protect the governance from being forced from one way or another is exactly what DeSci is all about. For me, and for any system to be governed, you first have to identify the system itself. You need to also identify all the elements inside of it, and you have to identify every element, goals, and incentive. For building a very rigid system to govern something, you have to really be clear on what you're governing, how you're governing that, and what are the rules and regulations behind it. If you have flaws in any of those questions in the first place, your governing model will also be flawed. And in order for us to detail here the topic of blockchain governance, we also have to solve these questions first. So the agenda for my talk today would be exactly, first of all, asking important questions about blockchain governance. Then I would provide a way or perspective from my research on blockchain stakeholder classification. And then I will talk about model for multi-stakeholder blockchain governance as one of the approaches to do the right way for governance in decentralized way. So without further ado, starting first of all with asking the right questions. When you start to ask the questions about blockchain governance, you first have to really nail it down what definition and scope of blockchain industry is. If we haven't really solved that, if we are not clear on the terms altogether what definition and the scope of blockchain industry is, all the rest is irrelevant. You will be flawed on the terms, you'll be considering that blockchain industry is something else, you may be failing to define what the scope is, and then you're essentially talking about different things. So building governance system on something that is wobbly by default and the foundation is flawed, I am as a civil engineer definitely know that without the right foundation you will fail building everything on top of it. So really thinking about definition and scope of the industry of blockchain is the first step you have to solve in order to find the common governance. Once you have done that, you really need to start thinking who are the stakeholders of the blockchain industry. And not just who are the stakeholders, but you also are responsible to ensure that you brought all the relevant stakeholders to the table and you approach them in a way that's relevant for your problem. Governance in itself is a very ambiguous word, and it may mean different things for different communities. Whether it's a governance of a DAO maybe completely different system from governance of a country. And you still need to think of stakeholders as classes and then ensure that you have a sufficient representation of each of them that are sufficient for creating a rigid governance structure for that particular case. Once you solved who are the stakeholders of blockchain industry, then you also have to think about their goals and incentives. Because in order to create a governance system, you have to make sure you account for everyone's interest. You need to make sure that you account for everyone's incentive. And ideally, you build the right system in place that motivates every party to be aligned with each other, so that there is no forces that go in different directions for the governance model. Instead, they're all aligned for the common good. And by common good, again, in different communities and organizations, this will be different things. It just, you have to think about goals and incentive first. So, starting with the blockchain industry definition, I'd be at a point where you need to come up with a decision with someone. I think it's a very logical and very simple way to approach the decision-making process, is that step back and think who are the stakeholders that I need to make a decision with. Whether it's a simple solution and I'm trading my candy for a piece of money in a supermarket, that's a two-stakeholder party system, and then we each represent a certain power and certain responsibility. Or I'm doing a DAO system and suddenly there are a lot of different stakeholders distributed in different places and are responsible for different systems. That's also fine. It just, I still have to think of stakeholders, and whenever I make a decision, I need to bring the right group to the table to make an agreement so that the system stays solid and the governmental decisions are approved by the whole community, especially when it's a decentralized community. So once we have the system of stakeholders, and once again, in different systems, some of those groups may be combined together. For example, users and developers might be the same kind of people, same kind of group, or in a particular scenario, it might be even the same person. That could be right, that could be wrong, but the general common grouping helps us to later then identify the priorities, responsibilities, and this structure will anyway help you to systematize your approach to governing a certain system if you're interested in so. So once again, the common blockchain stakeholder groups in this scenario would be at least users. By users, I mean token holders and end users. There will be developers and organizations. There could be further classification for core developers, maintainers, and contributors.